We all know that sudden sinking feeling. You're rushing through your inbox, you click a link that looked perfectly normal, and suddenly your browser does something weird.
Oh yeah, panic sets in immediately.
Right. Or maybe you get an alert on your phone saying someone just logged into your account from a country you've never even visited. You immediately wonder what to do next. But have you ever stopped to wonder what happens on the other side of the screen? How the cybersecurity defenders, the people actively watching the network, actually handle that chaos when your bad click triggers an alarm?
It's a really fascinating dynamic because for you, the user, it's a moment of sheer panic. But for the defenders in the SOC, it's just Tuesday.
Exactly.
It's a highly structured, rigorous process. And understanding that process gives you incredible insight into how modern digital security actually operates under pressure.
That is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We're stepping directly into the shoes of a SOC analyst, specifically the blue team defenders, and we're doing this by exploring a really compelling resource. It's a SOC interview masterclass slide deck created by InfoSec Pandy for the 100 Days SOC Challenge.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource.
It really is. We're going to look at the exact scenarios interviewers use to test analysts and extract the frameworks used to stop cyber disasters in their tracks.
What makes this source so valuable is that it skips the theoretical fluff. It's built entirely around real-world scenarios. Interviewers for these critical security roles, they don't just want a walking glossary of terms.
They don't care if you memorized a textbook.
Right. They want to see how you react when the network is on fire. They want to know how you prioritize a threat, how you communicate with your team, and whether you truly understand the operational workflow of a live environment.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can solve the puzzles, we need the rulebook. The source material outlines a core framework that applies to literally every single scenario we're going to talk about today. How do these analysts actually structure their thinking when an alert comes in?
They rely on the incident response cycle, or the IR cycle. It's a 6-step playbook that forms the absolute foundation of all defensive cybersecurity.
Step 1 being identify, I assume.
Exactly. Step 1 is identify determining what is actually happening. Step 2 is figuring out how to stop the threat from spreading further. Step 3 is investigate, which means diving into the logs, the alerts, and the endpoints to find the root cause.
Getting into the weeds.
Right. Then step 4 is eradicate, completely removing the threat from the environment. Step 5 is recover, getting operations back to normal safely. And finally, step 6 is improve. You analyze the lessons learned so you can prevent the exact same attack tomorrow.
The slide deck also points out some golden tips for anyone walking into one of these interviews. First, you have to actively demonstrate that you think like a defender, not a hacker. Second, you have to rely on your logs. You need to constantly reference your SIEM and your EDR telemetry. And above all, you have to project calm, structured thinking.
In fact, the source provides what it calls the ultimate one-liner interview formula.
Oh, the cheat code.
Exactly. If you get handed a nightmare scenario and your mind goes blank, this is your anchor. It goes exactly like this. I would first validate the alert, check logs in SIEM, contain the threat, investigate root cause, escalate if needed, remediate, and improve detection to prevent recurrence.
That covers all the bases.
It really does. If you can internalize that single sentence, you have the blueprint for reasoning your way through almost any digital disaster they throw at you.
I love that. It gives you a place to stand when the ground is shaking. All right, let's put that formula to the test. Let's start with scenario cluster 1, the front door assault. This is all about identity and logins. Scenario number 1, a user account successfully logs in from India, and then, just 5 minutes later, logs in from Russia.
What's fascinating here is that this tests a very specific detection concept known as impossible travel.
Because obviously you can't fly from India to Russia in 5 minutes.
Exactly. But the interviewer wants to know how you handle a potentially compromised account without accidentally locking out the CEO who just happens to be traveling. Notice the first step from our one-liner. Validate the alert. You don't just immediately nuke the user's access. You check the SUM alert and try to determine the context.
So you're trying to figure out if it's a legitimate commercial VPN node that an employee might be using at an airport versus an attacker bouncing traffic through a malicious proxy server.
Precisely. You had to differentiate between benign weirdness and actual malice. You check the IP reputation using threat intelligence to see if that Russian IP is tied to known threat actors.
You'd probably review the sign-in logs too, right?
Yes, in your identity provider like Azure AD or Okta. You correlate that with the development information in the MFA logs. Once you confirm the login is highly suspicious and not just a weird routing issue, then you move to containment. You temporarily disable the account, force a password reset, and forcefully invalidate any active sessions so the attacker is kicked out of the environment.
And then, per the framework, you'd scan the user's endpoint for any dropped payloads, escalate to the main IR team, and tweak the SIEM rules to catch that specific proxy IP faster next time.
Exactly. You close the loop.
Let's look at a noisier approach. Scenario 2. The SOC sees hundreds of failed login attempts on an admin account. Just a massive wall of red flags lighting up the dashboard. If I'm sitting in that interview chair, my gut reaction is to immediately block the IP address. But is that actually the right first move?
Blocking the IP at the firewall, or the web application firewall, is an essential containment step for a brute force attack, yes. But the interviewer is listening closely to see if you stop there. A rookie just blocks the IP. A seasoned analyst asks the more terrifying question.
Which is?
Did any of those hundreds of attempts actually succeed?
Ah, right. You can't just assume the front door held. You have to check if they got in.
Exactly. You lock the target account temporarily and you dive into the authentication logs to verify if a successful login occurred right at the end of that massive chain of failures. You also check the source IP geolocation and alert the IAM team.
And to stop them from just trying again from a new IP.
You'd implement rate limiting or adjust your conditional access policies to require stronger MFA for that admin account.
Okay, moving off the perimeter, let's look at what happens when the threat makes it inside. Scenario Cluster 2 focuses on endpoint nightmares and human error. Scenario 3. Your EDR tool detects malware, but the scenario specifically notes that it's on a laptop belonging to the finance team. So what does this all mean? Why does the interviewer care which department the laptop belongs to?
Because the interviewer is testing your awareness of business impact. Malware on an isolated test server is a nuisance. Malware on a machine that has direct access to the company's bank accounts, payroll systems, and sensitive financial data is a massive immediate crisis.
It changes the whole priority level.
It dictates the severity and the speed of your response. The very first step is containment. You isolate that endpoint from the network immediately via the EDR console.
You essentially pull the digital plug so the machine can't talk to anything else on the network, but you leave it powered on so you don't lose the data in RAM for the forensic investigation.
That's the exact methodology. Once it's isolated, you confirm the detection. You identify the malware family and its capabilities. But here's the crucial step that separates the okay candidates from the great ones.
I'm listening.
You have to check the network logs to see if that malware communicated externally before you isolated it. Did it exfiltrate financial data or communicate with a command server while it was active?
Because if it did, the blast radius is way bigger.
Right. You collect the forensic artifacts, pull the malware off, reset the user's credentials, and then take the IOCs, the file hashes or domains, and sweep the rest of the network to ensure it didn't spread.
That brings us to Scenario 4, which is probably the most common headache for any IT department on the planet. An employee calls the help desk. They report that they clicked a suspicious link in an email, got taken to a fake login page, and unfortunately, they entered their password.
The classic human element. Here, the interviewer is testing your phishing incident response and how you handle user-generated compromises. The immediate actions are standard. You reset the user's password, you revoke their active sessions, and you ensure MFA is strictly enforced.
If the user has already handed over their password, my first thought is that changing it solves the immediate problem. But the source deck points out a really insidious technique that attackers use once they get access to an inbox. Changing the password isn't actually enough, is it?
No, it's not. And this is a brilliant detail to bring up in an interview. When an attacker gets access to an inbox via phishing, one of their primary goals is persistence. They know you might reset the password eventually.
So they set up a backdoor.
Yes, specifically in the mailbox settings. They set up hidden auto-forwarding rules. They configure it so any incoming email containing keywords like invoice, payment, or password reset is automatically forwarded to the attacker's external email address. If you just change the user's password and call it a day, the attacker loses access to the account, but they still silently receive copies of the most sensitive emails.
That is terrifyingly simple. So as the analyst, you have to actively hunt for those rules and rip them out.
You must check the mailbox rules. Then, you pivot to the SIEM and run a query to see if anyone else in the company received that exact same phishing email. You block the sender domain at the email gateway, you scan the compromised user's endpoint just in case the link also dropped a payload, and you flag that user for additional security awareness training.
It's incredible how one little click triggers an entire avalanche of investigative work. Let's shift gears to a different kind of threat profile. Scenario Cluster 3 covers insider threats and data leaks. Scenario 5. The SOC detects a massive data upload to an unknown external cloud server, and the logs show it's happening at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the threat actor might not be an outside hacker at all.
Precisely. This scenario tests your awareness of data exfiltration and how to handle potential insider threats. First, you validate the alert using your DLP tools alongside your proxy and SIEM logs. You need to identify which user account and which physical system is initiating this massive upload. Time of day is a huge contextual clue here.
And you need to determine the nature of the data walking out the door. Are we talking about a massive folder of family photos, or is someone exfiltrating a database full of PII and proprietary source code?
The nature of the data dictates the entire escalation path. If it's highly sensitive corporate data, containment involves silently disabling the user's access and isolating the device. You capture all the logs and analyze the network traffic to see exactly what left the building.
But because it's an insider.
Exactly. Because this involves a potential insider, an employee potentially stealing IP, the escalation path is much more delicate. You don't just blast an email to the whole IT team. You have to preserve the evidence carefully and immediately bring in the core IR team, human resources, and the legal department. This shifts very quickly from a purely technical issue to corporate espionage or serious legal liability.
You're suddenly dealing with chain of custody and legal frameworks, not just IP addresses. Scenario 8 touches on a similar internal governance issue. A perfectly normal standard user account suddenly appears in the domain admins group. They just got the keys to the kingdom.
This tests your monitoring of IAM and privilege escalation. You have to verify if this change was actually authorized through proper channels. Maybe the employee got a promotion or transferred to the sysadmin team. You review the IAM logs and the change management tickets to see who granted the access.
And if there's no ticket?
If there is no ticket and it's unauthorized, you revoke the privilege immediately. Then, you investigate the specific admin account that granted the power, check for related suspicious activity on both accounts, and implement tighter privilege access reviews to catch it faster next time.
All right, take a breath because we are heading into Scenario Cluster 4, Chaos and Crisis Mode, Scenario 6. You're staring at your dashboard, and suddenly the SIEM is flooded with thousands of alerts. The screen is just a wall of critical warnings.
This is the ultimate test of alert triage and operational maturity. Interviewers want to see if you possess the composure to handle a storm or if you'll just freeze up. The correct response is highly methodical. You don't just start clicking alerts randomly.
Obviously not.
You check the alert sources to identify if a specific system is malfunctioning or if a particular rule is being overly noisy. You prioritize the critical alerts over the informational ones, and you look for correlation. Are these thousands of disparate events actually part of a single coordinated attack path?
The source material really emphasizes the danger of alert fatigue here. If you don't tune your SIEM rules to filter out the noise, you risk creating an environment where analysts just start ignoring the dashboard entirely.
Alert fatigue is a massive operational hazard. The boy who cried wolf syndrome in a SOC leads to catastrophic breaches. Major real-world incidents often happen not because the attack was invisible, but because the true positive alert was buried under 10,000 false positives.
So tuning is critical.
Yes. As an analyst, part of your job in the improve phase is constantly tuning detections and suppressing false positives so the team only sees actionable intelligence.
Which is the perfect segue to an alert you absolutely cannot ignore. Let's combine Scenario 9 and Scenario 7 because this represents the ultimate nightmare for any defender. Scenario 9. You detect anomalous C2 traffic heading outbound to a known malicious infrastructure. And before you can fully investigate, you hit Scenario 7. Multiple users start calling the help desk saying their files are locked and there's a ransom note on their desktop.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, ransomware is an existential threat to business continuity. The C2 traffic you saw was the early warning. The ransomware communicating with the attacker's server, likely exchanging the encryption keys or signaling that the deployment was ready.
And once that note appears,
Once that ransom note appears, the failure state has been reached. The response here must be incredibly swift and decisive. You isolate the infected systems immediately to stop the encryption from spreading laterally across the network. You block that C2 communication at the perimeter firewall.
This is an all-hands-on-deck, wake-up-the CISO level event, right?
Absolutely. Communication is vital. You identify the specific ransomware strain if possible, as that might give you clues about the threat actor's tactics. But the most critical step for recovery, step 5 of our IR cycle, is evaluating your backups.
Because you're not paying the ransom if you can help it.
Right. And the nuance here is crucial. Attackers know you have backups, so they actively hunt for them and try to encrypt or delete them first. You need to verify if you have offline immutable backups that the attacker couldn't reach. You disable compromised accounts, do a massive sweep of the entire environment to ensure the attacker doesn't have a backdoor persistence mechanism waiting, and then, only when the environment is clean, you begin restoring operations from those offline backups.
And throughout all of this, you must preserve evidence because law enforcement and cyber insurance investigators will be heavily involved.
Exactly.
And then, of course, the final step, tearing apart the attack path to figure out how they got it, whether it was an unpatched server or a phishing email, and improving your defenses so that specific threat actor can't walk right back in the same way. Okay, final scenario, number 10. You're sipping your morning coffee, you look at the industry news, and a critical zero-day vulnerability has just been announced for a core piece of software your company uses everywhere.
This tests proactive defense and threat hunting. A zero-day means there is a critical flaw. Attackers are actively exploiting it in the wild, and initially, the vendor might not even have a patch available. Your first move is asset inventory. You have to identify exactly which systems in your environment are running that vulnerable software.
Because you can't protect what you don't know you have.
Exactly. You urgently review the vendor advisory for any temporary mitigations, like disabling a specific service or blocking a certain port. You then proactively query your logs, specifically hunting for exploitation attempts targeting that new flaw. You create a new SIEM detection rule for the specific IOCs associated with the exploit, inform management of the risk posture, and deploy the patch the absolute second it becomes available.
That is an intense gauntlet of scenarios. But the source material also gives us the actual toolkit these analysts use to fight these battles. The slide deck mentions specific real-world tools that you should be familiar with to show you understand the modern SOC ecosystem.
Like which ones?
For SIEMs, they're talking about platforms like Splunk, Sentinel, and ELK. For your endpoint defense, your EDRs, it's Defender and CrowdStrike. You have threat intel aggregators like VirusTotal and AbuseIPDB to research those sketchy IP addresses and file hashes. And of course, workflow and ticketing systems like Jira and ServiceNow to meticulously document everything.
Yes, knowing the tools is great, but the Masterclass deck is very careful to outline the cardinal sins of an interview, the pitfalls that will disqualify you, regardless of how many tool names you drop.
The biggest one being jumping straight to the tools.
Precisely. Throwing technical tools at a problem without demonstrating a structured thought process. Saying I'll just check CrowdStrike means nothing to an interviewer if you haven't considered how to contain the threat or evaluated the business impact first.
You have to show the methodology. And the source explicitly warns against just throwing your hands up and saying, I don't know, when you get stumped. If they give you a scenario that isn't in a textbook, you don't just give up. You lean on the IR cycle. You reason your way through it. Identify, contain, investigate. You show them how you approach an unknown problem.
An interviewer will respect a candidate who relies on a logical framework to deconstruct an unknown problem far more than someone who memorized a list of tools but freezes the second. A scenario deviates from the script.
And if you're listening to this and thinking, I want to try this, I want to see if I can handle the pressure, the deck lists some incredible places to practice these exact skills hands-on. Platforms like TryHackMe's Blue Team Labs, Cyber Defenders, Let's Defend, and Splunk BOTS, you can actually log in, look at real SIEM dashboards, and play the role of the defender against simulated attacks.
It's arguably the most effective way to transition from theoretical knowledge to practical operational capability.
So bringing it all together, what we've learned from this SOC Masterclass is that cybersecurity isn't magic. It's not just hackers in hoodies typing fast. When you click that bad link and the alarms go off, the response is a rigorous step-by-step methodology. It's about a human being on the other end saying incredibly calm, identifying the anomaly, containing the blast radius so the damage stops, investigating the root cause, and then critically learning from the attack to make the network stronger for tomorrow.
This raises an important question, though.
Oh.
We just walked through 10 scenarios, and the final step for every single one of them was improve. Adding a new detection rule, Implementing tighter conditional access, putting up more barriers, tuning the SIEM to be more aggressive. If every single attack, every phishing click, every 0 day, every impossible travel alert results in the network getting locked down just a little bit more, is there a tipping point?
What do you mean?
At what point does a network become so perfectly hardened and so heavily monitored for anomalies that legitimate employees can no longer easily do their daily jobs without tripping an alarm? Where exactly is the line between perfect security and total operational paralysis?
Wow, that is a heavy thought to chew on. Finding that delicate balance between keeping the threat actors out and letting the business actually function. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the SOC analyst. We hope it gave you a whole new appreciation for the digital defenders working behind the screens. Keep questioning, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.